Some stories find us at just the right time. This one came to me on a quiet evening, the kind where the house settles into itself and the only sound is the clock on the mantel. It's a tale from the Old West, not about gunfights or outlaws, but about something harder to come by a second chance. The kind most folks figure they've run out of by a certain age. I've learned that ain't always true. Sometimes, the best chapters come after we've given up on the book. So pull up a chair, pour yourself some coffee, and let me tell you about a man named Cole Bennett and the woman who refused to let him disappear. The stagecoach driver yanked the brake lever hard enough to make the wheels scream. Clara Whitman gripped her carpet bag and stepped down into heat that pressed against her chest like a flat iron. Dust coated her tongue before she drew a second breath. The town behind her, if 3 buildings and a water trough counted as a town, offered nothing but silence and the buzz of flies. She walked. Half a mile down a rutted track, she stopped. Where there should have been a ranch house, there was char. Black timbers jutted from the earth like broken ribs. The barn gone, the corral fence ash. A hand-painted sign had been driven into the cracked ground at an angle. Its letters crude and final: foreclosure, First Bank of Abilene. A man emerged from a shed 20 yards off. Tall, gaunt. His shirt hung loose on a frame that had once been broader. His hands were wrapped in stained bandages, the skin beneath puckered and pink where the cloth had slipped. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he's already decided to lose. "You, Clara Whitman?" "I am." "Then I'm sorry you came all this way for nothing." His voice scraped like a dull blade. "Ain't nothing here for you. Go on back." Clara set her carpet bag down on the blackened earth. Ash lifted around her hem, slow and soft as snow. She did not move. She did not blink. No. There's an old saying, where you stand matters more than where you started. If this story finds you resting somewhere tonight, I'd be glad to know where you're listening from. Drop a word in the comments, and know you're in good company. Evening came slow, dragging the last of the light across the flat Texas scrub, like a hand wiping a table clean. Cole built a fire outside the shed. Small. Just enough to heat the blackened pot he set over the flames. Beans, nothing else. He didn't look at Clara while he worked. Didn't speak. The fire popped and hissed. And somewhere out past the ruined fence line, a coyote started up, then thought better of it. Clara sat on an overturned crate, her traveling dress stiff with dust. She watched his hands the way he favored the left one, kept the right closer to his body. The bandages were fraying at the edges. Whoever had wrapped them hadn't done it well, or hadn't cared to. He handed her a tin plate. She ate. The beans were bland, undersalted. She didn't ask for more. When did it happen? Cole's jaw tightened. He stared at the fire. 3 months back. The words came out flat, worn smooth like river stones. Middle of the night. I was in the barn, mending harness. Had a kerosene lamp on the post beside me. He stopped, poked at the coals with a stick. Wind came through, or maybe I knocked it with my elbow. Don't know. Don't matter. His voice dropped. Hay caught first, then the walls. By the time I got the horses out, 4 of 6, there wasn't nothing left to save. Clara set her plate down. The firelight carved deep shadows under his cheekbones. He looked 10 years older than 38. "Folks in town," he said, quieter now. "They look at me like I'm cursed, like I carry ruin in my pockets." She didn't answer. just pulled the moth-eaten blanket from her bag and spread it on the dirt floor of the shed. Before she lay down, she turned back. I read the county records before I bought my ticket. The debt, the missed payments. I know about it. Cole went still. The fire crackled. A log shifted, sending sparks up into the dark. You knew. His voice scraped raw. And you still came? Clara didn't look away. I reckon I did. She turned over, pulling the blanket to her chin. Behind her, she heard Cole's boots scrape against the dirt, heard him settle against the shed wall, heard him not sleep. And in the silence, one question hung between them, answered. What kind of woman boards a train for a man she knows has already lost everything? Dawn broke thin and gray over the burned land. Clara was already walking the property line when the first light touched the horizon. Her boots left prints in the ash-dusted soil. In her left hand, she carried a small leather journal, its cover cracked and soft from years of use. In her right, a pencil stub worn down to 2 inches. She stopped at a charred fence post, wrote something, moved on. Cole watched her from the doorway of the shed, a tin cup of cold coffee in his hand. She walked with purpose, measuring distances by her stride, marking positions, counting what remained and what was gone. Not the wandering of a woman who didn't know what she was looking at. The opposite. He set the cup down and crossed the yard. What are you doing? Clara didn't look up. Counting fence posts? 37 need replacing on the north line alone. The south's worse. She made another mark. You had good land here. Still do. Under the char. Had. Cole's voice came out harder than he meant. Past tense. She closed the journal and turned to face him. The early light caught the dust on her collar, the smudge of ash on her cheek she hadn't bothered to wipe away. Take the morning stage, he said. Go back to Houston. Find yourself a man who ain't half burnt and owing money to every bank between here and Abilene. Clara tucked the pencil stub behind her ear. I sold my shares in my father's shipping company to get here. Liquidated every stock certificate with my name on it. She paused. I ain't buying a ticket back. Cole stared at her. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of sage and something metallic old smoke, baked into the soil. That's a lot of money for a stranger's dirt. Ain't a stranger's. Clara pulled a folded paper from the pocket of her dress. Thick cream stock, edges crisp, a bank stamp in blue ink. First Bank of Houston. Got my name on the deed now, too. Don't it? He didn't take the paper. Just looked at it like it might catch fire in her hand. I won't take charity, he said. Makes a man small. Ain't charity. Clara stepped closer. Close enough that he could see the flecks of amber in her brown eyes. It's buying into a partnership. You know this land, you know how to work it. I've got capital in 2 good hands. She held them up pale, uncalloused, but steady. Teach me the rest. Cole's jaw worked. He looked past her, toward the blackened foundation of the house he'd been born in. 38 years of his life, reduced to a footprint of scorched stone. You're out of your mind. Maybe. Clara folded the bank draft and put it back in her pocket. But I'm also right here, and I ain't leaving. She nodded toward the shed. You got a post hole digger in there. They rode into town on the back of a borrowed mule cart. Clara, holding the reins because Cole's hand still ached when he gripped too tight. Jenkins' mill sat at the far end of the main street, past the general store, past the bank with its clean windows and polished door, past the knot of men who stopped talking when the cart rolled by. Clara felt their eyes, heard the whispers that started before she'd even passed. That's the Whitman woman. Fool enough to marry a man with nothing but ash. Give it a month. She'll be on the next stage east. She kept her gaze forward. Cole's shoulders had gone rigid beside her. At the mill, a man in a sawdust-covered apron came out wiping his hands on a rag. He looked at Cole, then at Clara, then back at Cole. "Bennett, didn't expect to see you." "Need lumber," Cole said. "Posts, crossbeams, whatever you've got seasoned." The man, Jenkin, Clara assumed, scratched his chin. "You got payment?" Clara climbed down from the cart. She pulled the bank draft from her pocket and held it out. Jenkin's eyes went wide. "That'll cover it," she said. "And then some." They loaded the wagon in silence. Jenkin's boys helped, stealing glances at Clara like she was some exotic bird blown off course. She ignored them, lifted boards alongside Cole until her shoulders burned and her palms went slick with sweat inside the borrowed his gloves, too big for her hands by half. As they finished loading, an older woman stepped out of the general store across the street, gray hair pinned tight under a sun-faded bonnet. She watched them for a long moment, then called out, "Cole Bennett." Cole turned. His jaw tightened. "Mrs. Pemberton." The woman crossed the dusty street, her eyes moving from Cole to Clara and back again. "Tom Gentry was asking after you yesterday. Said he's been meaning to come by." She paused, something unreadable in her expression. "Might be worth your while to receive him if he does." Before Cole could respond, she turned and walked back into the store. Clara looked at him. "Who's Tom Gentry?" "Old rancher. Knew my father." Cole climbed onto the cart and took up the reins. "Don't know why he'd be asking after me now." The sun was dropping toward the horizon when they sank the first post. Cole dug. Clara held the post steady, her boots braced in the loose soil. The hole was 3 feet deep, the earth hard beneath the first layer of ash. He tamped the dirt around the base with the flat of the shovel, packing it tight. When he stepped back, they both stood there, looking at it. One post, cedar, straight and raw against the orange sky. "You always this stubborn?" Clara asked. Cole wiped his forehead with the back of his wrist. "You always this bullheaded? Reckon we're well matched, then." He almost smiled. Almost. The corner of his mouth twitched, then flattened. He picked up the shovel and moved to the next spot. They worked until the light failed. 4 posts in the ground by the time Clara's arms gave out. She sat on the edge of the cart, drinking water from a canteen that tasted like tin and leather. Cole stood a few yards off, his back to her, looking at the line they'd started. 4 posts, a beginning, nothing more. But it was something. Clara watched him standing there, silhouetted against the dying light, and she thought about the letters she'd read before she came. Not just the county records, not just the debt notices. The other letters, the ones from the town doctor, from the preacher, from a woman named Mabel Gentry, who ran the boarding house. They'd all said the same thing. In different words, Cole Bennett was a good man who believed he was cursed. A man who'd stopped fighting. A man who was waiting to disappear. She hadn't told him about those letters. She hadn't told him a lot of things. The question now was simple when he found out what else she was hiding, the full size of her inheritance. The real reason she'd chosen him out of all the men who'd placed advertisements, would he see it as trust or betrayal? The days found their rhythm. Clara woke before the rooster, if they'd had a rooster, which they didn't. She woke to the gray light seeping through the cracks in the shed walls, to the smell of ash that had worked its way into everything she owned. Her back ached from sleeping on hard-packed earth. Her hands, once soft from years of Houston parlors and white cotton gloves, had started to crack at the knuckles. She didn't complain. There was no one to complain to, and nothing it would change. Cole was always up before her. She'd find him by the fire pit, coffee already percolating in the battered pot he'd salvaged from the rubble. He'd hand her a cup without a word. She'd drink it black, no sugar, no cream. Nothing to soften the bitterness, and they'd start fence posts first, then crossbeams, then the long, slow work of clearing debris from where the barn had stood. By the end of the third week, Clara's arms had stopped shaking when she lifted a board. By the fifth, she could drive a nail in 4 strokes instead of 7. Cole watched her improve without comment, but she caught him looking, sometimes, a flicker of something that might have been surprise, quickly buried. The bandages came off his hands after the second week, leaving the scars bare, pink and shiny where the burns had healed, the skin still tender. He didn't hide them anymore. Not from her. One morning, he handed her a bucket and a brush. "Whitewash," he said, "for the posts. Keeps the rot out." The mixture smelled sharp, like lime and lye. Clara dipped the brush and dragged it across the first post. White dripped down her wrist, spattering the front of her dress. She wiped at it with her free hand, which only made it worse. Cole's mouth twitched. He didn't laugh. She wasn't sure he remembered how, but the twitch was there. "You're supposed to get it on the wood," he said. "I'm aware." By the time she finished the first post, her dress looked like a painter's dropcloth. Her hair had come loose from its pins, and a streak of white ran across her forehead where she'd pushed the strands back. She didn't care. The post gleamed in the afternoon sun, bright against the brown of the scorched earth. Cole came up beside her. He studied the work, then nodded once. Not bad. From him, it sounded like high praise. The horses, the 4 that had survived, grazed in a makeshift corral Cole had rigged from salvaged timber and rope. Clara had been afraid of them at first. They were big, unpredictable, with eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "Watch the ears," Cole told her one morning, leading the bay mare toward the water trough. "Pinned back means she's angry. Pricked forward means she's curious. Loose and sideways. She's relaxed." Clara watched the mare's ears. They swiveled toward her, then away, then back again. "What does that mean?" "Mean she's making up her mind about you." Clara held out her hand, palm flat, the way she'd seen Cole do. The mare sniffed it. Warm breath against her skin. Then slowly, she dropped her head and let Clara scratch the spot between her eyes. "She likes you," Cole said. He sounded almost surprised. "Maybe she's got a good taste." The trips to town became routine, every week or so. They'd load the cart and ride the 3 miles in for supplies nails, rope, salt, flour. The general store sat on the main street, a wooden building with a false front and a bell that jangled when the door opened. Mrs. Pemberton ran the counter. She was a woman of 60 or so, with steel gray hair pinned tight and eyes that missed nothing. The first time Clara walked in alone, Mrs. Pemberton looked her up and down like she was assessing livestock. "You the Whitman girl from Houston?" "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Pemberton reached for a bolt of calico. Started measuring without being asked. You know what you married into. Clara met her gaze. I know what I chose. Something shifted in the older woman's face. Not warmth exactly, but something close to it. Cole's mama used to shop here, Mrs. Pemberton said, cutting the fabric with sharp scissors. Good woman. Died too young. She folded the calico and set it on the counter. Her boys got her eyes. Same stubborn set to the jaw, too. Clara paid for the supplies. As she turned to leave, Mrs. Pemberton spoke again. Town talks. Miss Whitman. Don't mean they're right. Outside, Cole waited by the cart. His hat pulled low against the sun. Men passed on the boardwalk, tipping their hats but not stopping. Women whispered behind gloved hands. Clara climbed onto the cart and took the reins. What did she say? Cole asked. That your mama had stubborn eyes. He was quiet the whole way back. That evening, they sat on the half-built porch, 4 boards nailed to a frame, nothing more, and watched the sun drop toward the horizon. Cole had been working on a rocking chair he'd pulled from the ashes. One runner was cracked, the seat charred on one side, but the bones of it were solid. Clara handed him a cup of coffee. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away. This was my mother's, Cole said, running his hand along the arm of the chair. She used to sit here every evening, watch the light change. He paused. Pa said it was a waste of time. Said watching wouldn't put food on the table. What do you think? Cole turned the chair over, examined the cracked runner. I think Pa was wrong about a lot of things. The fire crackled in the pit beside them. Somewhere out in the scrub, a nightbird called. He died thinking I'd never amount to anything, Cole said. Quieter now. Said I had failure in my blood, same as his father, and his father before that. He picked up a piece of sandpaper, started working the rough edge of the wood. Maybe he was right. Clara watched his hands move scarred, calloused, careful. The hands of a man who knew how to build things, even if he'd forgotten why. Why'd you never marry, Cole asked, not looking up. Back in Houston, pretty woman like you, money in the family, must have had offers. I had plenty of offers. Clara pulled her shawl tighter against the evening chill. Couldn't find a man who saw past the money. They'd court me with flowers and poetry, and all they ever looked at was the inheritance. She paused. After a while, you start to wonder if that's all you are. A number in a ledger. Cole set down the sandpaper for the first time since she'd arrived. He looked at her, really looked, not the quick glances he gave when he thought she wasn't watching. And now you found a man who ain't got any. Funny how that works. The silence stretched between them. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who had stopped pretending. Cole picked up the chair and held it toward the firelight, checking his work. Should be ready by tomorrow, Addie said. Could put it on the porch, if you wanted. I'd like that. He nodded, set the chair aside, picked up his coffee and drank it in one long swallow. Clara watched him. And she thought, he doesn't know yet about the rest of the money, about why I really chose him, about the letters I read, the questions I asked, the plan I made before I ever bought that ticket. She'd tell him. Soon. But not tonight. Tonight, they had coffee. They had firelight. They had a rocking chair that was almost mended. It was enough. And then, from the direction of the main road, came the sound she hadn't expected, the creak of wagon wheels, the jingle of harness brass, and a voice calling out in the fading light. "Hello, the house. Cole Bennett. You home?" Cole stood, his hand moving instinctively toward the shed where he kept his father's old rifle. "That's Tom Gentry," he said, his voice tight. "And he don't make social calls." Tom Gentry climbed down from his wagon, slow and deliberate, the way a man does when his knees have seen 60-odd years of hard use. His beard was tobacco-stained, his shoulders still broad despite the stoop that age had started carving into his spine. "Bennett?" He nodded once. "I heard you've been busy out here." Cole stood at the edge of the porch, his posture stiff. "Mr. Gentry wasn't expecting you." "No, I don't reckon you were." Gentry looked past Cole, toward the charred foundation of the house, the skeletal remains of the old barn. His face gave nothing away. "Brought some folks with me. Hope you don't mind." Behind Gentry's wagon, two more rolled up the track, then a third, then a fourth. Men in work clothes, their wagon beds loaded with fresh-cut lumber, sawhorses, hand tools, women in sunbonnets carrying wicker baskets, children peering over the sideboards with wide eyes. Clara counted 15, 20, more arriving on horseback from the direction of town. "What is this?" Cole's voice came out rough. Gentry spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Your daddy helped my family back in the drought of '71. Lost half our herd that summer. Would have lost the rest and the land with it if your pa hadn't driven his cattle onto our pasture to share the day's last grazing." He met Cole's eyes. "Figured it was time I paid it forward. Mr. Gentry." "Tom," the old man held up a weathered hand, "and don't go making a speech. We ain't here for speeches. We're here to work." He turned and waved at the men climbing down from the wagons. "Bring the lumber. We're burning daylight." The morning blurred into motion. Men unloaded sawhorses, set them up in the cleared space where the barn had stood. They measured and marked, sawed and hammered, their voices calling out to each other in the shorthand of men who knew this work in their bones. The smell of fresh-cut pine filled the air, sharp and clean against the lingering char. Clara found herself pulled into the current. One of the women, Mrs. Gentry, Tom's wife, pressed a basket of cold biscuits into her hands and pointed toward the men. "They'll be hungry by noon. Best start now." The other women had already spread blankets in the shade of the surviving oak tree. They unpacked wicker baskets, fried chicken, wrapped in checkered cloth, jars of lemonade sweating in the heat, pies with latticed crusts. Children darted between the wagons, chasing each other and stealing scraps when their mothers weren't looking. Clara worked alongside them, carrying water to the men, holding boards steady when an extra pair of hands was needed. Her palms blistered, then bled, then blistered again. She didn't stop. A woman named Sarah, the wife of one of the younger men, sidled up beside her during a rare moment of rest. "You're the Houston bride," Sarah said. Not a question. "I am." Sarah studied her face. "Folks in town are taking bets on how long you'll last. What's the over-under?" A surprised laugh escaped Sarah's lips. "Most say a month, maybe 2. She tilted her head. "What do you say?" Clara looked across the worksite, to where Cole stood with the other men, his sleeves rolled past his elbows, his scarred hands gripping a crossbeam as they lifted it into place. "I say they're going to lose their money." By midday, the frame of the barn had begun to take shape. 4 posts anchored the corners. Crossbeams connected them, forming the skeleton of something real. Cole worked harder than any of the other men, throwing himself into the labor like he was trying to outrun something. Tom Gentry caught Clara watching and ambled over. His pa was the same way, the old man said, following her gaze. Couldn't accept help worth a darn. Thought everything had to be earned. And if you couldn't earn it, you didn't deserve it. He scratched his beard. Stubborn fool, but he wasn't all bad. Cole doesn't talk about him much. Wouldn't expect him to. They butted heads from the day Cole was old enough to have an opinion. Gentry's voice softened. But I remember the night Cole was born. His pa rode 15 miles through a thunderstorm to fetch the doctor. Nearly killed his best horse doing it. He shook his head. A man can be hard and still love his family. Just means the loving comes out sideways sometimes. More neighbors arrived as word spread. By afternoon, nearly 30 people moved across the property, men on ladders, women organizing food, children carrying tools and water buckets. The sound of hammers rang out steady as a heartbeat. The sun crawled across the sky. By late afternoon, the barn frame stood complete naked ribs of fresh pine against the orange sky. The men stepped back, wiping sweat from their foreheads, admiring what they'd built. The women began packing up the remains of lunch. Children, exhausted from a day of running, dozed in the wagon beds. Tom Gentry shook Cole's hand. Should have the siding up by next week if you want the help. Cole's throat worked. I can't pay you back for this. Didn't ask you to. Gentry's grip tightened, then released. Just pass it on someday. That's how it works out here. The wagons pulled away one by one, their wheels raising dust in the fading light. Cole stood in the middle of the yard, watching them go. He didn't move, even after the last wagon disappeared around the bend. Clara gathered the remaining dishes, carried them to the shed, set them down. When she came back out, Cole was gone. She found him behind the new barn frame, sitting in the sawdust with his back against one of the fresh posts. His shoulders were shaking. Clara's stomach dropped. She'd never seen him cry, had wondered. In fact, if he still knew how. But when she got closer, she realized it wasn't tears. It was laughter. Broken, ragged laughter that sounded too close to sobbing. The laugh of a man who didn't know what to do with what he'd been given. She didn't ask what was funny. She just lowered herself down beside him, her dress catching on the rough wood shavings, and sat there. The last light of day bled across the sky in streaks of red and gold. Cole's laughter faded. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. "Don't that beat all?" he said. His voice scraped raw. "People showing up for the fellow who burned down his own barn." Clara didn't answer. She reached over and brushed a wood shaving from his sleeve. He flinched at the touch, then went still. "I don't know what I am," he said. "I don't know what any of this is." "You're a man sitting in sawdust," Clara said quietly. "And I'm a woman sitting next to him. Maybe that's enough for right now." Cole dropped his hands. He turned to look at her, really look, the way he had that night on the porch. His eyes were red-rimmed, bloodshot, confused, but underneath all that, something else. Something that hadn't been there before. "Why?" he asked. "Why do you stay?" Clara held his gaze. "Because you keep asking me to leave." The answer hung between them, strange and true. Cole's mouth open, then closed. He shook his head. A small movement, barely more than a twitch. "You're out of your mind," he said. But there was no bite in it, just wonder. They sat there until the stars came out, saying nothing more. The new barn frame creaked and settled around them, fresh wood adjusting to its bones, and then Clara heard what she'd been dreading since she arrived, the sound she knew would come eventually, no matter how many fence posts they sank, or how many neighbors showed up with lumber. The distant clatter of a buggy on the hard-packed road, the measured clip of well-shod horses, the jingle of brass fittings that didn't belong on a rancher's rig. Cole heard it too. His jaw tightened. "That ain't neighbors," he said. Clara's hand found his in the sawdust. She squeezed once. "No," she said. "That's the bank." The black buggy rolled to a stop in the middle of the yard, its polished brass fittings catching the last of the daylight. Clara recognized the type before the driver even climbed down. The matched bay horses, the leather upholstery without a speck of dust, the way the man moved, careful, deliberate, like someone who measured every step by what it might cost him. Mr. Harrison, First Bank of Abilene. She'd seen his name on the foreclosure notices, seen it in the county records she'd studied before buying her ticket. But seeing the name on paper was different from seeing the man himself, standing in the middle of Cole's ruined land, with shoes that had never touched unpaved ground. "Mr. Bennett." Harrison picked his way across the yard, avoiding the worst of the sawdust and ash. His eyes swept over the property, the new barn frame, the whitewashed fence posts, the shed where Clara and Cole had been sleeping. He took it all in with the practiced assessment of a man who calculated value for a living. "I see you've been busy." Cole stepped forward, positioning himself between Harrison and Clara. "Mr. Harrison, wasn't expecting you till month's end." "No, I don't imagine you were." Harrison reached the patch of cleared ground and stopped, looking at the fresh lumber like it was a ledger entry that didn't balance. "The notices have been running in the Abilene paper for 3 weeks now. I assumed you'd seen them." "Don't get the paper." "Clearly." Harrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. He turned to Clara. "And you must be the mail-order bride from Houston. Mrs. Bennett, is it Miss Whitman?" Clara kept her voice even. "The marriage paperwork's at the courthouse, but we haven't had the ceremony yet." "Ah, practical." Harrison nodded once, as if filing the information away for later use. "Perhaps we could discuss this inside or wherever you conduct business these days." They had no table, no chairs except the half-mended rocker and a few overturned crates. Clara dragged 2 of them into the shade of the surviving oak and set them up facing each other. Harrison lowered himself onto one with visible distaste, brushing at his trousers as though the wood might stain them. He opened his leather satchel and withdrew a ledger, its cover cracked and worn from use. The pages inside were filled with columns of figures, neat rows of black ink marching down the paper like ants. "Let me be direct," Harrison said, flipping to a marked page. "The Bennett account is significantly in arrears. The fire, of course, complicated matters, but the issues predate the fire by some margin." Cole stood with his arms crossed, refusing to sit. The hammer he'd been using earlier still hung from his belt loop. "How much?" Clara asked. Harrison ran his finger down the column. "The original mortgage was $1,200. That much you knew." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "What you may not have known, what Mr. Bennett perhaps neglected to mention, is that there were additional loans, operating capital for the previous 2 seasons. feed and seed advances that were never repaid. His finger stopped at a number near the bottom of the page, with missed payments, accrued interest, and penalties for default. The current balance stands at $2,400. Clara's stomach dropped. The number was nearly double what she'd seen in the county records, nearly double what she'd prepared for. That's more than the land is worth, she said. At current valuations. Yes. Harrison closed the ledger with a soft thump. Which is why the bank is prepared to accept the property in lieu of payment. A clean transfer. No further obligations. He looked at Cole. You could walk away, Mr. Bennett. Start fresh somewhere else. Many men would consider that a mercy. Cole's jaw muscles bunched. He said nothing. The alternative, Harrison continued, is formal foreclosure. Public auction on the courthouse steps. Your family's name in every newspaper between here and El Paso, associated with failure and debt. He pulled a document from the satchel, thick paper, official seals, dense blocks of legal text. The bank is prepared to finalize proceedings in 3 weeks. That gives you until the 23rd of next month to either satisfy the debt in full or vacate the premises. 3 weeks, 21 days. Clara's mind raced. The money she'd brought the shares she'd liquidated covered the original debt. Not this bloated figure. She had more, back in Houston, sitting in accounts she'd kept separate from the transaction, but accessing it would take time. Telegrams to her father's banker, verification of identity, transfer protocols that the Houston bank would insist on before releasing funds of that size. What about partial payment, she asked. A good faith deposit while we arrange the remainder. Harrison's smile thinned. The bank has received good faith gestures from Mr. Bennett before. Miss Whitman. They have not proven reliable. Cole flinched. A small movement, barely visible, but Clara caught it. 3 weeks, Harrison repeated. Rising from the crate, he tucked the ledger back into his satchel, adjusted his hat. I suggest you use the time wisely. The bank takes no pleasure in these proceedings, but we will proceed nonetheless. He climbed into his buggy without another word. The driver flicked the reins, and the matched bays pulled away, their hooves raising small clouds of dust that hung in the still air long after the buggy had disappeared around the bend. Cole stood in the middle of the yard staring at the empty road. I should have told you, he said. His voice was barely audible. The whole of it, not just the fire. The payments I missed before, the money I borrowed and couldn't pay back. His shoulders sagged. I should have told you all of it. Clara walked toward him. Why didn't you? He turned to face her. His eyes were hollow, the eyes of a man who had been running from something for so long he'd forgotten what it looked like. Figured you'd leave faster if you knew. The words hung between them, raw and honest and terrible. And if I still don't leave? Cole looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his face, not hope. Exactly. Something smaller. Confusion. Maybe? Or the beginning of belief. Then it closed off. He shook his head, picked up his bedroll from inside the shed, and walked toward the new barn frame. Where are you going? Barn? He didn't turn around. Got work to do. Cole, I said I got work to do. Clara watched him disappear into the skeleton of the barn. She heard him moving around inside, heard the thump of the bedroll hitting the ground. He didn't come out. The sun climbed higher the next morning. Clara went back to her work whitewashing, mending, the endless small tasks that filled the hours. Cole worked in the barn, alone, speaking only when necessary. They ate their meals in silence, slept in separate buildings. The distance between them grew with each passing day. On the third evening, Clara found herself at the window of the shed, the oiled paper that served as glass casting everything in a yellow, filtered light. She looked out at the yard, at the barn frame silhouetted against the setting sun. Cole stood in the middle of the old house's foundation, the place they hadn't rebuilt. The charred boards and ash that marked where 38 years of history had burned to nothing. His head was bowed, his hands hung loose at his sides. He looked like a man attending his own funeral. Clara watched him for a long time. The kerosene lamp burned low beside her, casting flickering shadows on the shed walls. Outside, the sky turned from orange to purple to black. Cole didn't move. She made her decision. She pulled on her shawl, tucked her small leather journal into her pocket, and slipped out the back of the shed. The night was cool, the air sharp with sage and mesquite. She walked quickly, keeping to the shadows of the fence line, following the road toward town. The telegraph office sat at the end of the main street, dark and shuttered at this hour. But a light burned in the window above the operator's living quarters. Clara climbed the wooden steps, raised her hand, knocked 3 times. Footsteps inside, the scrape of a bolt being drawn back. The door opened, revealing a thin man in his nightshirt, spectacles perched on his nose. He squinted at her, bleary and confused. "Ma'am, it's past 10 o'clock. "I know." Clara pulled the journal from her pocket, opened it to a page covered in her careful handwriting, account numbers, names, amounts she'd memorized before leaving Houston. "I need to send a telegram, tonight, to the First Bank of Houston, and I need you to send a second one to Mr. William Ashford, my father's attorney." The operator looked at the page. His eyebrows climbed toward his receding hairline. "Ma'am, these amounts—" He looked at her again, taking in the ash-stained dress, the work-roughened hands, the steel in her eyes. "Are you certain?" Clara thought of Cole standing in the ashes of his childhood home. Thought of Harrison's polished shoes and cold smile. Thought of the 3 weeks ticking away like sand through an hourglass. "I arranged contingencies with my banker before I left Houston," she said. "He's expecting this wire. All I need is for you to send it." The operator hesitated. Then he stepped aside. Clara walked into the office, and the door closed behind her. And 3 miles away, in the darkness of the half-built barn, Cole Bennett lay awake on his bedroll staring at the stars, through the gaps in the unfinished roof, wondering why the woman from Houston hadn't come to say goodnight, and whether she'd finally realized what everyone else already knew, that some men were born to burn, and the kindest thing you could do was let them. Cole woke to the sound of nothing. No fire crackling, no coffee percolating, no Clara moving around the shed, folding blankets, preparing for the day ahead. Just silence, thick and heavy as wool, pressing down on the barn's unfinished walls. He pushed himself up from the bedroll, his back aching from another night on hard-packed earth. Straw clung to his shirt, to his hair, to the stubble on his jaw. His mouth tasted of dust and something sour, the taste of a man who'd stopped caring what he put in his body. Through the gaps in the barn siding, the morning light looked thin, gray, wrong. He walked across the yard toward the shed, empty. Clara's carpetbag was gone, her journal, the shawl she hung on the nail by the door, the small mirror she used to pin up her hair, all of it gone. Cole stood in the doorway, his hands hanging loose at his sides. The shed smelled like her still, lavender and soap and something else, something warm that he couldn't name. But she wasn't there. She'd left. Of course she'd left. He'd known she would. All Houston polish and quiet determination. Women like that didn't stay with men like him. They visited. They tried. They realized their mistake. They left. He walked back to the barn, sat down on his bedroll, stared at the wall. The morning passed. He didn't move. The sun climbed higher, burning off the gray. Noon came, marked by the angle of light through the gaps in the siding. He didn't eat, didn't drink. The horses nickered from the corral, wanting water, wanting attention. He ignored them. What did it matter? What did any of it matter? He'd burned down his own barn, lost his family's land, driven away the one person foolish enough to believe he was worth saving. His father had been right. Failure was in his blood. It ran through his veins like poison, touching everything, ruining everything. The afternoon heat pressed down. Cole lay back on the bedroll and closed his eyes. Sleep didn't come. Just the relentless churn of his own thoughts, circling like vultures over carrion. Every mistake he'd ever made, every person he'd disappointed, every promise he'd broken. His mother, dying in the back bedroom while he sat useless on the porch, unable to face her. His father, cold in the ground, still shaking his head in that disappointed way he'd perfected over 38 years. Clara, walking away down the road to town, her carpet bag in her hand, never looking back. At some point, he got up. His legs moved without his permission, carrying him out of the barn, across the yard, to the edge of the property where the old well stood. The bucket hung from its rope, dry and empty. He hadn't drawn water in 2 days. He cranked the handle. The rope creaked. The bucket descended into darkness. When he pulled it up, the water was cloudy, brown. Something had gotten into the well, a dead animal. Maybe, or just the ash that had worked its way into everything since the fire. He poured it out onto the ground and watched it soak into the dirt, leaving a dark stain, like blood, like everything he touched. He dropped the bucket, let it swing on its rope, walked away, and the sun was setting when he found himself standing at the edge of the old house's foundation. The place he'd been avoiding for months. The charred boards and scorched stone that marked where 4 generations of Bennetts had lived and worked and died. His great-grandfather had built the first cabin here. His grandfather had expanded it. His father had added the second story, the porch, the bay window in the front room where his mother used to sit and watch the road. All gone, all ash. Because of him, Cole stepped onto the foundation. The charred boards groaned under his weight. He walked to the center, the spot where the kitchen table had stood, where he'd eaten 10,000 meals, where his mother had taught him to read by lamplight, where his father had told him, again and again, that he'd never amount to anything. He stopped, looked down at his boots, black with ash. Then his knees buckled. He didn't fall so much as collapse, his legs folding under him like a marionette with cut strings. His hands hit the ground, first the scorched boards, the ash that had been his home, and then his knees. And then he was on all fours, staring down at the blackened earth. His stomach heaved. Nothing came up. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. He crawled forward. Didn't know why. didn't care, just moved, hand over hand, through the ash and the char, until he reached the corner where his mother's rocking chair had sat. The corner where he'd found her body, that morning 6 years ago, still and cold, and finally at peace. The ash was thick here, soft. It coated his hands, worked its way under his fingernails, stained his shirt and his trousers and his face when he finally collapsed forward, his cheek pressed against the ground. He lay there. The sky darkened above him. Stars appeared, one by one, cold and distant and uncaring. The ash was cool against his skin. It smelled like smoke and rain and endings. This was where he belonged, in the ruins, in the dirt, in the grave his own hands had dug. He closed his eyes. Cole. The voice came from far away, or maybe close. He couldn't tell. Cole, get up. He didn't move. Couldn't move. His body had stopped obeying him somewhere between the well and the foundation. He was done. Finished. Let the ash take him. Cole Bennett. You look at me right now. A hand gripped his shoulder. Pulled. He rolled onto his back, blinking up at the figure silhouetted against the stars. Clara. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving, her hair loose around her shoulders. Her dress was dusty from the road. In her hand, she held a single sheet of yellow paper, creased from being gripped too tight. You came back, he said. His voice sounded like a stranger's. I told you I would. I didn't believe you. I know. Clara crouched down beside him, right there in the ash, not caring that it was ruining her dress, staining her hands. Get up. Come inside. There's something you need to see. She helped him to his feet. His legs shook. His head swam. He let her lead him across the yard, past the barn, to the shed where a kerosene lamp burned in the window. Inside. She pushed him down onto the crate that served as a chair, lit a second lamp. The warm yellow light filled the small space, chasing the shadows into the corners. Then she set the paper on the crate in front of him. Cole looked at it. Yellow stock, Western Union stamp, typed words in neat rows, a telegram confirmation. From the First Bank of Houston to the First Bank of Abilene. A transfer of funds, all funds, every remaining asset, every share and bond and certificate Clara had to her name. The amount made his vision blur. $10,800. He read it again, then again. The numbers didn't change. You gave up everything, he said. His voice didn't sound like his own. For this, for me. Clara sat down across from him. The lamplight caught the amber flecks in her eyes. I gave up money, she said. That ain't everything. Cole looked at the telegram, looked at her, looked back at the telegram. Why? Clara didn't answer. And in the silence, a single question formed in Cole's mind, the question he should have asked weeks ago, the question he'd been too afraid to voice if she'd known about the fire, known about the debt, known about every failure and mistake before she ever bought that ticket. What else had she known, and what was she still not telling him? The 23rd of the month arrived wrapped in gray. Cole woke before dawn, as he always did. But this time he didn't reach for his boots. He lay on the shed floor. Clara had insisted he come inside after she'd found him in the ash, and stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind move through the gaps in the walls. Today was the day. Whatever happened, it ended today. 3 days had passed since Clara showed him the telegram. 3 days of silence, of working side by side without speaking, of meals eaten without tasting. She hadn't explained. He hadn't asked. The question sat between them like a stone neither could lift. $10,800. More money than he'd ever see in 5 lifetimes of ranching. Enough to pay off Harrison, rebuild the house, stock the land with cattle, and still have enough left to live comfortably for years. Why? The question haunted him. Why would a woman he'd never met, a woman from Houston society with money and options and a whole life waiting for her, throw everything away on a burned-out rancher with nothing to offer but debt and shame? It didn't make sense. None of it made sense, unless there was something she still wasn't telling him. He pushed himself up, pulled on his boots, and walked out into the gray morning light. Clara was already awake, standing by the fire pit with a cup of coffee in her hands. She'd been quiet these past few days, watchful, waiting for something. "They'll be here soon," she said. Cole nodded. He didn't trust his voice. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist. By 9 o'clock, the first wagon appeared on the track, Harrison's black buggy, the matched bays stepping high and careful. Behind him came a second wagon, and in it sat Sheriff Tom Dawson, his badge catching the pale light. And behind them both, walking or riding in carts and on horseback, came the town. Mrs. Pemberton from the general store, Tom Gentry and his boys, Sarah and her husband, the telegraph operator, still in his shirt sleeves, the blacksmith, the preacher in his black coat. Faces Cole had known his whole life. Faces that had looked away when they passed him on the street these past 3 months. They gathered at the edge of the property, 15, 20, 30 people, watching like spectators at a hanging. Harrison climbed down from his buggy, leather satchel in hand. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Bennett, Miss Whitman." He nodded to each of them in turn. "I trust you've had time to consider your options." Cole stood on the half-built porch, his hands loose at his sides. The deed was in his pocket, the paper that said this land belonged to the Bennett family, had belonged to them for 3 generations. He'd looked at it last night, traced the signatures with his finger, his grandfather's name, his father's name, his own. "I've considered them," Cole said. Harrison opened his satchel, withdrew the foreclosure documents. "Then you understand that the bank is prepared to take possession of this property today. Unless the full balance is satisfied," he held out a pen, "sign here, and we can conclude this matter quietly." Cole looked at the documents, looked at the pen, looked at the crowd gathered at the edge of his land, the people he'd grown up with, the people who'd watched him fail. His hand moved toward the pen. "Wait," Clara's voice cut through the silence. She stepped forward, past Cole, past the porch railing, and stopped directly in front of Harrison. In her hand, she held a single sheet of paper, thick cream stock, official seals, a notary's stamp in the corner. "The bank wanted the full balance," she said. "Here it is." Harrison took the paper. His eyes scanned the figures, and for the first time since Cole had known him, the banker's composure cracked. His face went pale. His hands trembled. "This is a certified bank draft," he said, "for the full amount, plus interest, plus penalties." He looked up at Clara, then at Cole, then back at the paper. "The debt is satisfied. The land is clear." A murmur ran through the crowd. Cole heard Tom Gentry's low whistle, heard Mrs. Pemberton's sharp intake of breath. The sheriff shifted on his wagon seat, looking suddenly like a man who'd shown up for a funeral and found a wedding instead. Harrison folded the bank draft, tucked it into his satchel. His jaw was tight, his movements stiff. He'd come here expecting to take a man's land. Instead, he was leaving with nothing but money. "The bank will send confirmation within the week," he said. "Good day." He climbed back into his buggy, snapped the reins, and drove away without looking back. The crowd didn't move. They stood there, frozen, staring at Clara like she'd just pulled water from a stone. Cole stared too. His legs felt weak. His mind couldn't hold what had just happened. "Why?" The word came out of him before he could stop it. Loud enough for everyone to hear, loud enough to carry across the silent yard. Clara turned to face him. Her eyes were steady, calm, the eyes of a woman who had been waiting for this moment since she stepped off that stagecoach. "Why would you do this?" Cole's voice cracked. "You don't know me? You never met me before you got here? Why would you bet everything you have on a man who can't stop burning things down?" The crowd leaned in. Even Tom Gentry, who never listened to gossip, tilted his head. Clara walked toward Cole, slow and deliberate, until she stood at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at him. "I knew about the fire before I bought my ticket," she said, her voice carried in the still air. "I knew about the debt, the missed payments, the bank notices." She paused. "I read every letter I could find, talked to everyone who would talk to me. I knew what folks here said about you, that you're cursed, that you carry ruin in your pockets, that anyone who gets close ends up burned." Cole's throat closed. He couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "I also knew something else." Clara climbed the first step, then the second. "The night that barn caught fire, you didn't run. You went back in. Mrs. Gentry wrote me about it, said the neighbors counted. 6 times. Cole, you got back into that burning barn 6 times to pull out horses that weren't worth half what you lost saving them." She stopped on the top step, close enough that he could see the dust on her collar, the determination in her jaw. "A man who does that ain't cursed," she said. "He's just somebody the world ain't caught up to yet." Cole's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the porch boards, his back against the railing, his hands shaking in his lap. The crowd was watching. The whole town was watching. And for the first time in 3 months, he didn't care. "You knew," he said. "All of it. Before you ever came. I knew. And you still chose this. Chose me." Clara sat down beside him on the porch. The wood creaked under their weight. She reached over and took his hand, the scarred one, the right one, the one he'd been hiding since the fire. She held it in both of hers, turning it so the morning light caught the puckered skin. "These don't tell me what you destroyed," she said quietly. "They tell me what you were willing to burn for." From somewhere in the crowd, Tom Gentry's voice cut through the silence. "Well, I'll be." The Bennett boy finally found someone stubborn enough to match him. Laughter rippled through the gathered townspeople, not mocking laughter, but the warm, surprised laughter of people watching something they hadn't expected to see. Mrs. Pemberton wiped her eyes with the corner of her apron. The sheriff tipped his hat and turned his wagon around, heading back toward town. Cole sat on the porch. Clara's hand wrapped around his and felt something shifting inside him, something old and hard and heavy, something he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it wasn't part of him. His father's voice, telling him he'd never amount to anything. the town's eyes, looking away when he passed, his own face in the mirror, the face of a man who'd given up, all of it cracking, breaking. Falling away, the crowd began to disperse, drifting back towards the town in twos and threes. Tom Gentry paused at the edge of the property, caught Cole's eye, and nodded once, the nod of a man acknowledging something that didn't need words. Then he was gone, and Cole and Clara were alone. The sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the morning gray. The new barn frame cast long shadows across the yard. Somewhere in the corral, one of the horses nickered softly. "What now?" Cole asked. Clara squeezed his hand. "Now we finish what we started." She stood, brushed off her dress, and walked toward the shed. At the door, she paused and looked back. "Coming." Cole looked at the land spread out before him, the new fence posts, the barn frame, the foundation where a house would stand again. His land, their land. He pushed himself to his feet, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Cole Bennett walked forward. 3 months later, the house stood whole. Clara stepped back from the bedroom window, a length of blue gingham clutched in her hands. The curtain rod, a piece of dowel Cole had sanded smooth, waited above the frame. She climbed onto the wooden chair, threaded the fabric through, and let it fall. The cloth caught the afternoon light, casting blue checkered shadows across the plank floor. She smoothed the edges, adjusting the drape until it hung straight. Through the glass, real glass now, shipped from Abilene at a cost that made Cole shake his head, she could see the yard spread out below. The new barn, its siding complete, its doors hung true. The corral fence, whitewashed and sturdy. The garden plot she'd staked out with string and hope, already showing the first green shoots of spring. Smoke rose from the chimney behind her, cooking smoke. The smell of it drifted through the house, wood fire and coffee and something sweet, biscuits. She'd put them in before starting on the curtains. The house was small, 2 rooms downstairs, a loft above for storage. Nothing like the houses she'd grown up with. Their high ceilings and servant quarters and rooms no one ever used. But every board in this house had been cut and fitted by hand she knew. Every nail driven by people who had chosen to help. Every window placed to catch the light just so. It was enough. More than enough. Clara climbed down from the chair and walked through the main room, running her hand along the table Cole had built from salvaged oak. A tin can sat in the center, filled with late-blooming asters she'd picked that morning, purple and white and yellow, their stems crooked, their petals already starting to soften at the edges. They'd be wilted by tomorrow. She'd pick more. The biscuits were ready. She pulled them from the oven, set them on the cooling rack, and wiped her hands on her apron. Through the kitchen window, she could see Cole working on the porch. He was bent over his mother's rocking chair, a piece of sandpaper in his hand. The cracked runner had been replaced weeks ago, but he kept finding small things to fix a rough spot on the arm. A loose spindle, a nick in the seat. She'd caught him at it 3 times this week alone. Clara poured 2 cups of coffee, balanced a biscuit on each saucer, and carried them outside. The porch wrapped around 2 sides of the house. Cole had built it wide enough for 2 chairs and a small table, with a railing low enough to prop your feet on. The boards were new pine, still pale and smelling of sap. In a few years, they'd weather to gray. Clara found she was looking forward to watching them change. "Rocking chair looks good," she said, handing him a cup. Cole took it, set down the sandpaper, and leaned back to examine his work. The chair sat in a patch of afternoon sun, its wood glowing warm and golden. He'd rubbed it with linseed oil until the grain shone through, every whorl and knot visible. "Ma would have liked you," he said. Clara sat down on the porch step, her skirt pooling around her. The coffee was hot against her palms. "You think so? Know so?" Cole picked up his cup, blew across the surface to cool it. "You're both too stubborn to quit." They drank in silence. The sun moved lower, casting long shadows across the yard. In the corral, one of the mares nickered to her foal, a little bay filly born 3 weeks ago, all legs and curiosity. They'd named her Ember, Clara's choice. Cole hadn't argued. "Tom Gentry stopped by this morning," Cole said, "while you were in town." "What did he want?" "To talk about spring planting." Cole set his cup on the porch railing. "He's got a line on some good seed wheat. Thinks we could put in 40 acres on the south section, maybe oats on the north. Says the soil's ready for it now that the ash has been turned under." Clara nodded. She'd been thinking about the same thing: what to plant, when to plant it, how much they'd need to put away for next winter. The numbers ran through her head constantly now, a steady background hum of calculation and planning. It was different from managing her father's accounts, smaller, more immediate, more real. "What do you think?" she asked. Cole was quiet for a long moment. He looked out at the land, his land, their land, and Clara watched his face. The tension that had lived in his jaw since the day she'd arrived, that constant clench of muscle and bone, had started to ease, not gone entirely, maybe never gone entirely, but softer, less like armor. "I think we could make something here," he said slowly. "Something that lasts." The words hung in the air between them. Clara didn't rush to fill the silence. She'd learned that about Cole he needed time to find his way to what he wanted to say. He stood up from the railing and walked to where she sat on the porch step, lowered himself down beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. The heat of him seeped through the fabric of her dress. "I ain't good at this," he said, "saying things. I know. I spent 38 years believing I was built wrong, that everything I touched would end up like that barn ash and ruin, and people shaking their heads." He picked up a splinter of wood from the porch boards, turned it over in his fingers. "Pa told me I had failure in my blood. I believed him. Believed it so long it felt like the only true thing I knew." Clara watched his hands. The scars had faded from angry red to pink, the skin smooth and shiny where the burns had healed. They didn't tremble anymore. "And now?" she asked. Cole dropped the splinter. He turned to face her, and his eyes, those dark eyes she'd been learning to read, held something new, something quieter than hope, steadier. "Now I reckon I was wrong." He reached over and took her hand. The scarred one. The right one. The one he used to hide in his pocket or behind his back. He held it up between them, turning it so the fading light caught the puckered skin. "Used to be. I'd look at these and see everything I wrecked. Every mistake I ever made. Every reason why nobody should stick around." Clara didn't pull away. She watched his face, watched the effort as he searched for words that didn't come easily. "Now I reckon they just mean I'm still here," he said. His voice cracked on the last word. He cleared his throat, tried again. "And so are you." She could have said 100 things, could have told him about the weeks she'd spent researching him before she came, The letters she'd written to everyone who would answer. The careful plan she'd made, weighing risks against possibilities, could have explained the logic of it, the calculation, the methodical steps that had led her to that stagecoach. But Cole didn't need logic. He needed something simpler. "I'm staying," she said. He looked at her. "I know." The sun touched the horizon, spilling orange and gold across the Texas flatland. The sky above them shifted from blue to purple to the deep, clear black of a country night. Stars appeared, one by one, then all at once. Cole didn't let go of her hand. They sat there on the porch of the house they'd built, watching the light fade, saying nothing. The silence was comfortable now, easy. The silence of two people who had stopped pretending. The rocking chair sat empty beside them, waiting. Tomorrow. Cole would carry it to the corner of the porch, position it just so. Tomorrow. Clara would plant the first seeds in her garden, pressing them into the dark soil with bare hands. And tomorrow they would wake before dawn and start again, building the life they'd chosen, one day at a time. But tonight, they sat together and watched the stars come out. Cole's thumb traced a slow circle on the back of her hand. His shoulder pressed warm against hers. His breathing was steady, calm, and Clara leaned into him, closed her eyes, and let the night settle around them soft and dark and full of promise. Somewhere in the barn, Ember nickered to her mother. The sound carried across the yard, mixing with the chirp of crickets and the distant call of a whippoorwill. The house creaked and settled behind them, new wood finding its shape. Cole turned his head, his lips brushing against Clara's hair. "Thank you," he said. The words came out rough, almost too quiet to hear. Clara opened her eyes. "For what?" "For not giving up, for staying when anyone else would have left." He paused. "For seeing something I couldn't see myself." She lifted their joined hands, his scarred, hers calloused now from months of work, and held them in the last sliver of light bleeding across the horizon. "These don't show what you lost," she said. "They show what you saved, what you were willing to fight for." She lowered their hands to rest on his knee. "That's the man I came here to find." Cole was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was steady. "I ain't the same man you found." "No." Clara smiled. "You're better." The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent and beautiful. The night deepened around them. The house stood solid at their backs. The barn rose dark against the sky, and the land stretched out in every direction, their land now, paid for and planted and ready for whatever came next. Cole squeezed her hand once. Clara squeezed back, and they stayed there, together, until the moon rose over the Texas plains, and the last of the day's warmth faded into the cool of the evening. Two people who had found each other across miles and letters and ash, choosing again, as they would choose every day that followed, to build something worth keeping. There's a quiet that settles after a story like this one. Not empty quiet, the kind that sits with you, the way an old coat rests on your shoulders when the evening turns cool. Some of us know what it is to carry something heavy for a long time, to wake up believing the worst about ourselves because someone told us it was true, and we had no reason to doubt them. Some of us have stood in the ashes of what we built and wondered if starting over was even possible anymore. And perhaps you've known what it feels like to be chosen not despite the mess, but because of who you are inside it. Or perhaps you're still waiting for that. Either way, it's all right. These things don't need to be resolved tonight. They're allowed to simply rest, the way the land rests after a long season. We don't always get answers. Sometimes we just get another morning, and the quiet company of people who understand without needing to be told. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know.